Perfect. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to learn about the exciting new program being launched by Ontario Soil and Crop under the On-Farm Climate Action Fund. So this program is an expansion of sort of the core off-CAF program looking at innovative beneficial management practices. My name is Samantha Ilgulay. I'm the Agricultural Climate Modelling Specialist at Ontario Soil and Crop, and today I'm going to sort of MC this event. We have some awesome guest speakers joining us who are going to talk about their experiences working with the innovative BMPs covered under this program. But before I introduce them, I'm going to provide just a bit more detail about what the program is, who it's available for, and what's involved. So hopefully, there we go. As this program falls under sort of the broad off-CAF program, it shares the same fundamental goal, which is to support Ontario farmers in the adoption of management practices to tackle climate change through cost share funding. So the core off-CAF BMPs, which we've all sort of heard about for a few years now, provide cost share funding for nitrogen management, cover cropping, and rotational grazing. Where this new program comes in is that it expands these BMP programs to cover sort of newer and more innovative practices, including biochar being applied as a soil amendment to support stable carbon inputs into your soil, and biological inoculants for nitrogen fixation. This new innovative program also expands beyond sort of the standard goal or fundamental goal of off-CAF, which is to provide cost share funding. And it aims to also support data collection around these innovative BMPs. What this means for participants is that alongside having access to an 85% or maximum 85% cost share funding for their approved projects, they'll also have access to regular soil sampling, greenhouse gas monitoring, crop yield monitoring, more, which we completed by OSCAA staff. The data collected through this program will then be provided to our participants and also be able to understand the variability that occurs across the province and where these innovative BMPs sort of fit into that. So this very broad introduction, a lot more information is now available on our website, which I've linked here, and you can also access through the scan QR code. On that website, there is the program guide, frequently asked questions, information sheets, and more. You'll also please email us at offcaf at Ontario Soil and Crop if you have any questions. The program is available to Ontario farmers. Participants with approved projects will be required to implement the chosen BMP for 2 years, so that's 2026 and 2027. Those applying biochar will be required to apply it twice in 2027. The intake for the program opens next Monday, so it's January 26th, and it is a limited intake. So if you go on the website and you think this is for me, this is what I've been looking for, I'm really interested, I really recommend that you apply sooner rather than later. So with that, that's sort of my piece done. The main goal of this session was to really hear from producers and people who have involvement with these innovative BMPs, learning about their experience, what they've tried that works, what maybe doesn't, where they recommend that you maybe start if you're going to be involved in this program. So with that, I am going to, one more slide, oopsie. So these are producers that we have welcome today. I'm going to go through and introduce each of them just before they present their piece. If you have any questions at all about the program to our guests today, please put them in the Q&A section or the chat, and we'll be monitoring that and be able to ask those questions for you. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'm going to introduce Norm, who I'm sure many have heard from before. And while he prepares to share his screen, I'll give a wee bio. So Norm is a 6th-generation farmer in the Peterborough country. He manages a diverse 500-acre farm, which includes a 4-crop rotation of corn, soybeans, wheat, and oats. Norm has a lifelong interest in supporting soil health biodiversity using soil amendments such as biosolids, green manure, and compost processed on his farm. Combining extensive soil sampling, imagery, and variable rate technology, Norm demonstrates the economic benefits of being ecologically sustainable in a modern cropping system. He will be speaking about the Woodley Catching Carbon project, exploring the transformation of underutilized forests and agricultural biomass through pyrolysis to biochar for use in the agricultural sector, supporting overall crop production and the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions. Take it away, Norm.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam, and thanks for having me be a part of your presentation here today. So I'm going to go over a little bit of brief history about our farm and how we ended up looking at biochar as a soil amendment for our system, and that really begins for us back in 2015 when we started down this soil health journey. So our farm was founded in 1902. We're a sixth-generation family farm. And previous to my being involved in the farm actively, we were a 900 sow hog operation, so pretty specialized in animal welfare. And that included a two-crop rotation of corn and soybeans. Corn would have been fed to the hogs, and then soybeans as a rotation. A large fire here on our farm in 2018 forced a bit of a pivot in terms of where our farm was going, and we've really transitioned into a much more diverse operation today. So on our 500 acres, we have a market garden. We primarily cash crop corn, soy, wheats, and oat in the rotation, and we also have cover crops in three of those rotations. We have some forages, some hay, some woodlots, and grasslands. And in 2023, we launched a forestry division as well as a compost facility here on the farm where we make approximately 2,000 tons of compost. We have a commercial passive solar greenhouse. And in 2022, we also added back livestock to the land in the form of rotationally grazed sheep. So we rotationally graze those year round, and through the summer months, every 3 or 4 days, they're moved to new pasture areas. For 35 years, we've also been organic maple syrup producers. So our journey into soil health began back in 2015, and some of you might remember the Ontario Soil and Crop Soil Your Undies program. And that's a picture of my son there with the pair of tidy whities. And that really opened my eyes to what was happening in the soil. We spent a lot of time and attention focusing on what's happening above the ground, but what that really taught me is that we need to spend a little bit more time focusing on what's happening underground and what's happening with the biology. That led us into an extensive imagery and soil sampling program through the late 20s and really opened my eyes to what's happening on the farm. We'd been treating every acre the same for so many years, and that really opened it to what do we need to do to handle some of that variability that we have in our fields. In 2020, we joined the on-farm research program, and in 2024, we also joined the Living Labs research program on our farm. What we quickly identified is that our farm was really lacking organic matter. We were in the low twos to mid twos on our farm, and my goal was to figure out how do we get the soil organic matter and the carbon in our soils increased in a pretty rapid fashion. We know that organic matter helps with water retention and nutrient cycling, and I was looking for any kind of way that we could increase that organic matter in the soil. So over the last few years, we've explored things like biochar, which you see on the right, a very rudimentary way of producing it here on the farm, very small scale. We've introduced biosolids into the farm as an amendment, and we've also brought in some off-farm amendments such as mushroom compost and some compost that we make here on the farm. It was around that time that I came across a product called biochar. And biochar really is a soil amendment for agriculture. It's essentially carbon or charcoal created in a non-oxygenated environment. So in 2019, we funded a feasibility study to try to determine if we could actually produce this stuff on the farm. And what we found out at that time is that it wasn't commercially feasible. And that was for a few reasons. One, our feasibility study sort of finished right around the time that COVID hit. We were having difficulty sourcing a commercial plant or a commercial facility that could produce the biochar economically on the farm. But most importantly, we were having trouble sourcing locally the products that we needed to make that biochar. So we either had to look at agriculture waste and find a way to pelletize it, or we needed a clean source of wood chip or woody biomass material, and we just couldn't find that here locally at that point in time. So we sort of put it on the back burner. But out of that came some relationships with our local county and the municipality. And out of that came a compost division that we started in around that 2020 timeframe. So we were taking leaf and yard waste from the local municipality. We were grinding that up, converting it to a compost product, and we were then using that on our land to apply as a soil amendment. We were really happy with that program, and we wanted to expand it, and that's kind of led us to where we are here today. So in 2024, we were approached by the local division of the Ontario Woodlot Association, and they had a challenge locally. They had managed forests that weren't being managed, and landowners that couldn't afford to pay for the harvest of these sort of plantation thinnings, is what I call them. And you have a plantation that's planted row on row, and at that 20 to 30-year mark, you have to go in and thin approximately a third of that forest in order to allow the other trees to grow to their full production. And so this really became the opportunity for us to source that local material that we were missing in our feasibility study in 2019. And through some research, through investigating different types of equipment and the infrastructure required to meet the needs of the Ontario Woodlot Association here locally, we decided to pursue this project initially to support our compost expansion, but also for long term to look into whether or not we could produce biochar with these extra materials that we're able to get our hands on. And so here's a picture of our forestry operation. So like I said, we launched this in late 23, early 24, and we went out and purchased some forestry equipment, harvesters, forwarders, and as chippers and trucks to handle this material. So we essentially go to private landowners and public landowners who have the need for a plantation thinning or for any remedial work, and we're really targeting the non-marketable, unusable woody biomass materials that are in those spaces. And these are the types of trees that aren't big enough to make 2x4s or 4x4s for the lumber industry, and but are still required to be removed in order to help with the long-term sustainability of those forests. So in this picture here, you see this is our typical setup. So we have an excavator with a grapple saw on it. It feeds a chipper, and that chipper then chips those logs into wood chips, and then we haul those home to the farm, where we ultimately turn those into compost. So we're blending those materials currently with windrower, and they're primarily wood chips and agriculture waste products. So now that we've secured the materials that we're looking to use for our biochar facility, we started to look again at funding the construction of a biochar plant. So in 2024, we pulled the trigger on designing a plant that we could house here on the farm. And we designed it in 24. It was built in 25. We received it here in mid 25. And what we're looking to do is produce a facility that could be used as a knowledge transfer, something that could be replicated on other farms. We had some specs that we wanted to have for the farm. 2 tons a day was sort of the production targets that we were seeking. And that was really based on the materials that we had inbound, the size of the facility that we had, and what we could ultimately both use on our farm and ultimately sell as a commercial product to the outside world. We also wanted to investigate some opportunities for combined heat and power, and whether or not we could use some of the gases or the heat that was generated from the plant to heat buildings on the farm, or potentially utilize it to dry some grains on the farm as well. So with that, we're set to begin production here in 2026, and our goal is to conduct some field trials both on our farm as well as in conjunction with Ontario Soil and Crop and other producers through some of these programs that are currently available. At 2 tons a day, we're estimating we can produce approximately 500 tons per year, and that will ultimately sequester approximately 1,400 tons of CO2 emissions annually through the program. So this is a picture of our farm here. The two buildings that you see on the left are the two buildings that survived the fire in 2018. And what we've done is we've repurposed that entire building for the biochar facility. So we have the plant located on the one side, and then we have material handling and material storage behind the building for the inbound wood chips that we're going to convert to biochar. And this here is a picture of the plant. So we had this commissioned and built for us by a company out of Quebec. And we essentially told them what we were looking to accomplish. They had quite a bit of experience in pyrolysis, and they were able to custom build this unit for us, which is now physically located on our farm. So, what is biochar exactly? Well, biochar is essentially charcoal, which is being used as a soil amendment in agriculture. It's produced in a non-oxygenated environment through a process called pyrolysis, and it was first discovered in the Amazon in the 70s. And essentially, they found that there were entire civilizations that were able to sustain themselves by adding charcoal to the soil in soils that were very leachable. So those are your typical desert-like sandy soils in some of those Amazon rainforests, where normally they wouldn't be able to grow a lot of vegetable and fruit type plants. But by adding the charcoal to the soil, they discovered that there was a lot of benefits to it, and they were able to sustain civilizations for generations. It's an engineered soil amendment, and it's really aimed at improving a lot of the soil functions. So I'm a visual person, so this is a nice image here of exactly what's pyrolysis and exactly what the process is. So throughout the lifetime of biomass, whether it's a tree or agriculture biomass, that's capturing CO2 through photosynthesis. We're then taking that biomass and drying it down and placing it into a process where we're heating that biomass. In the process of heating that biomass, it releases a gas. That gas is then ignited, and the ignition of that gas and the heat that it's created continues the entire process. So once the process begins, in the case of us with wood chips and egg waste, we're able to sustain that entire process on its own. It produces its own heat, which subsequently dries the inbound material, and it also produces its own gas, which we ignite and continues the entire process of pyrolysis. At the end of it, you're left with essentially pure carbon, and that carbon is stable. So once it's applied to the soil, it won't break down for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Carbon content needs to be approximately 80% in order for that carbon to be classified as stable, and at that point, it won't break down. So some of the uses and benefits of utilizing biochar in agriculture, it improves soil structure and increases porosity and water retention. So if you can picture a square inch of biochar under a microscope, it has millions of tiny little crevices and holes in it. It's extremely porous, and they say that the surface area of one cubic inch of biochar is about the equivalent of a football field. So you take all those little pores and holes and you stretch them all out, and you have the surface area of approximately a football field. So extremely porous. It also enhances nutrient retention and cation exchange capacity. So if you think of your Brita filter, it's essentially carbon, charcoal, same type of material. It wants to absorb everything. So everything wants to bind to that, including nutrients. Because of that, it will help reduce nitrogen and phosphorus leaching losses. So biochar that's inoculated or charged with a nutrient will then act as a slow release for those. It provides a habitat for beneficial microbes as well. So those little tiny bacteria microbes use it essentially as an apartment building. All those little pores act as holes where they bring their food back, and as they excrete those food items that they're consuming, it essentially binds and attaches to the carbon itself, and then that also acts as a slow release fertilizer over the longer term. It's best when it's enhanced with compost, and it helps with the compost maturity process as well. So if you can add the biochar to a compost pile or a manure pile, it will actually help absorb some of the ammonia and some of the phosphorus that would otherwise leach out or oxidize into the atmosphere through the natural decomposition of the compost pile. And it contributes to long-term carbon sequestration. As I mentioned earlier, this project for us on our farm really is a CO2 emissions goal, and each ton of biochar will sequester between 2.5 and 2.8 tons of CO2es. So by taking the carbon that biomass has accumulated over the course of its lifetime, we're essentially locking it in and then placing it into the soil. As far as application rates and best management practices for biochar, We haven't actually done a lot of work with biochar in temperate soils. So this program is a great opportunity for anyone thinking of using biochar on their farms to explore the different uses and the different types of applications that you might want to incorporate into your farming system. Anecdotally and through research, essentially we're looking at half a ton up to approximately a ton of biochar per acre, and one time or over multiple applications. But once it's been applied to the soil, in theory, you shouldn't have to add more carbon to the soil afterwards because it is stable. It's not actually breaking down, but it continues to recycle itself in its use in the soils. The best thing you can do with the biochar is to blend it with a compost or manure, and that essentially charges it or inoculates it with the nutrients before application. There are risks of applying biochar directly to the soil without inoculating it or charging it. Because it is very much like a sponge, it will or it can absorb a lot of the nutrients that are currently in the soil and may release those at a timing that's not adequate for the cropping system that you're trying to produce. You can pre-moisten it through the compost process as well. Because it does want to take on water, it can absorb quite a bit of water even at those low application rates in the soil. And ideally, you want to incorporate it, either a light incorporation into the soil, or if you're combining it with the compost, you can apply it directly to the surface as well. So there's a lot of hype about biochar around the world. There are many companies in Europe that are using biochar for municipal applications. There's also a lot of industrial uses for biochar. Denmark, for instance, has just announced that they're actually taxing CO2 emissions to their agriculture sector, 100 euros per ton of CO2 emitted. But subsequently, they've taken a good portion of that money and invested into the biochar sector. And they've actually made an announcement that they're going to contribute 1.35 billion euros towards a biochar study within their agriculture sector. Companies like Google as well have set high targets for production of biochar to help them offset some of their CO2 emissions. They've recently announced a partnership in India with Varaha, who are looking to produce approximately 100,000 tons of biochar there. So a lot of interest in biochar, but there really hasn't been a lot of practical research in agriculture to date. So we're really open-minded about how biochar is going to fit into our modern cropping system here in a temperate climate. But we're also looking forward to experimenting with it and seeing what the results are both on our farm and hearing from others that are looking to use biochar as well on their farms. As I mentioned previously, our biochar project is essentially knowledge transfer, an opportunity for us to demonstrate, to take on some of the risks of learning about carbon and how we can add more carbon to the soil. And I have to mention all of the partners that we have on this project, and they've really been instrumental in the success of this project and the launch of this plant that we've built on our farm. And we're very thankful for everyone who's helped us. And if you have any questions about biochar, what we're doing here on the farm, we're happy to share. This is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out anytime. Our doors are always open, and anyone who wants to chat about biochar or what we're doing here, we're always happy to have you. Thanks so much, Sam.
Thank you, Norm. It's always so interesting, cool to see what's happening over at your spot. I've got a few questions lined up, and before we go into them, I'm just going to say if anybody listening has any questions, please put them in the chat, the Q&A section, and we'll make sure as much as we can that they are answered. My first one, which I think was sort of briefly mentioned on, but it's something that I think a lot of people, especially if they're interested in participating in our program and applying biochar on their fields, is going to be, do you have any sort of suggestions or tips about how biochar can sort of be implemented into somebody's fertility plan on their farm? Like, can you apply at the same time that you're applying fertilizer, or does it need to be a separate application? Sort of those types of small details that become important.
Yeah, it's extremely important to point out, Sam, that
Yeah.
biochar is not a fertilizer. It really
Yes.
is an
Yeah.
amendment. So it complements an existing fertility program. What we do know is that fertility will bind to the carbon,
Uh,
and in that case, there it does act as a slow release. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at on our farm is can we reduce our commercial fertilizer usage by essentially inoculating the biochar with some of that fertility early on, so that it acts as
mm,
a slow release mechanism for those nutrients over the course of the growth cycle. We know we lose a lot of the fertilizer nutrients that we apply early on in the season? And can we reduce that by having a bit more of a slow release on that biochar over the course of the season?
Yeah, for sure. So it sort of can be, and you mentioned earlier the concept of inoculating your biochar. How would you suggest maybe somebody best do that on their farm or in their way? Is it mixing it with a liquid fertilizer, manure, compost, whatever suits them?
Yeah, certainly mixing it with a liquid fertilizer is an option. Like
Mhm.
if we can inoculate it or impregnate it with UAN, I think would be a good method. It becomes difficult to spread such a low rate of biochar at that stage. You know, we're talking half a ton up to a ton per acre. That's not a lot of material.
Yeah.
For us in our system, we see the best opportunity is in our compost stream. So by adding the biochar to say the 8 or 10 tons of compost that we're applying on the field, we see that as the best opportunity to help the compost maturity process, but also to absorb any of those nutrients that would otherwise oxidize. But really, anyone that has manure in their system would be an ideal candidate for the use of biochar. It can be blended, will help absorb some of the leachates that are there. There may also be opportunities to combine the biochar and the liquid manure system as well. Anecdotally and through some research, it helps reduce a lot of the odors that are in liquid form because of its absorption qualities, and therefore it might have a place in those liquid systems as well.
Cool. Yeah. No, that's, I think, really important to understand sort of how we can best inoculate it. Another question we've gotten a couple of times, I see it here, is to your, obviously you're producing biochar site, but to your knowledge, what do you think the general sort of cost per acre for application would be
Yeah,
for
and someone
biochar?
mentioned the cost per ton.
Yeah.
We see currently in the marketplace the price between 1,500 and $2,000 per ton. I think long term for agriculture for mass adoption of the product, we will need to get it under that $1,000 per ton price point. Obviously, there's a lot of cost that goes into the actual material collection, the material handling to then produce it. The cost of the technology to actually build a physical plant to convert the material to biochar is quite expensive today. But longer term, I see that opportunity in that sweet spot to be sub $1,000 per ton. But currently, the marketplace is in that 1,500 to $2,000 per ton.
Yeah. So that's where something like cost share program to cover sort of 85% of those costs would be really valuable to provide people an opportunity to try it out without really having to commit to that
Yeah,
high of a cost there.
absolutely. It helps de-risk the innovation and it helps
Yeah.
allow producers to venture into that space without taking a huge cost hit on it, for sure.
Wonderful. Yeah. And something else that I've sort of noticed in my research is something that sort of comes up, and you might not have the answer because you're just trying it out on yours, but do you find that sort of how important is the type of feedstock that is used on the results that you get? And in a similar but slightly different vein, do you find that like biochar is best suitable for a specific soil type over another, sand versus a clay? What do you?
Yeah, certainly the research supports that soil types that are highly leachable, so those sandy soils with low CECs seem to have the best response for biochar applications. Here in Ontario, obviously we're in a temperate climate. We typically have, medium to coarse soils. There's quite a bit of clay soils here as well. So we don't know how those soils are going to respond relative to some of those sandier soils, but that's kind of what we're trying to figure out through this program as well, both on our farm and in working with other cooperators. Um, no question, the feedstock, from my perspective, we're looking to add carbon to the soil. So we've depleted the organic matter in our soils by 50% over the last 100 years in North America. Our soils need carbon. Carbon's the building block for everything that we do. It helps stimulate the biology. To the best of my knowledge, whether you're using hardwood, whether you're using agriculture residues, whether you're using softwood, at the end of the day, if you can produce or purchase a stable carbon form, and that's approximately over 80% stable carbon, then that won't break down in the soil. It's going to provide some life and habitat. That's my opinion. there are applications for biochar in cosmetics and toothpaste and different industries that might have very specific specifications for what the biochar needs to be. But for agriculture and the rates that we're applying on the acreages that we're looking to apply it to, I think any form of good stable carbon will be beneficial to the soils.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And then something I've noticed, I'm going to sort of cover a few of the questions that are turning up in the chat around obviously the source and where people could purchase biochar from. Obviously, there's your facility, which up and running soon in the Peterborough area. I've seen somebody in the chat mention Halliburton Forest, which obviously Halliburton, so a few more of our northern producers, connecting with them. There's a few people out sort of in Quebec where under our program, as long as you are in Ontario, you are more than welcome to purchase from more Quebec side, as long as it is applied in Ontario and your farm is located in Ontario. And I believe that there's maybe a site down southern Ontario, I think I saw, but the name has definitely missed, flown off my head. Norm, can you think, or do you know of any other sort of biochar producers in Ontario?
Yeah, there are 4 or 5 producers in Ontario, so Halliburton's certainly one. They have a primary customer that they serve, but they often have some excess biochar. There's a few mobile units out there as well where they're
Mm.
using a different technology than what we're doing, but they're producing biochar. Like you mentioned, there's some larger facilities both in Quebec and in British Columbia as well that have a biochar production. Certainly, the supply is going to be a challenge initially. We're hoping to have our facility online here this year, and things are scaling up pretty quickly. There's quite a few smaller companies that are popping up with the goal of producing biochar. So I think over the next few years we'll see quite a bit more production from that standpoint. But here in Ontario, I think currently there's only really 3 or 4 that would have biochar available at the moment.
Yeah, I think, but I agree. I think in the coming time, it's sort of, I feel like every month or so I see news of somebody else doing some research and bumping it up. But yeah, thanks so much, Norm, for all of this. It's been very interesting and very informative. If anybody has any more questions related to the biochar element, please put them in the chat and we'll get back to them sort of towards the end of the session or contact Norm directly if anything comes to mind, after the session is complete. Next up we have Sean and John who are going to talk about their work with biological inoculants. So Sean is the Director of Commercial Growth and Strategy at CanGrow Crop Solutions. He has 30 years experience in crop inputs and is an Ontario Certified Crop Advisor. He is also the Director of OSCAA for the St. Clair region, and he is supported today by John, who farms a 200-sow farrow-to-finish hog operation in Oxford County with his wife Karen and son Jeremy. John has extensive experience with nutrient management and water protection, serving on several advisory committees in the area. He is an agricultural representative for the Thames Sydenham Source Water Protection Committee and has won several awards for his service to the community, agriculture, and his crop yields. So thank you so much, Sean and John, for joining us and talking about biological inoculants today. I'll hand it over to you.
No, perfect. Thank you. I'm assuming you can see my screen okay. And
Perfect.
I'm going to start the presentation and then pass it over to John halfway through to give some of his insights and what he's learned about biologicals, using them on his farm. A little bit about CanGrow Crop Solutions. We're a fluid liquid fertilizer manufacturer located just outside of Alvinston, Ontario. And from this location, we service all of Canada and the northeastern US. CanGrow is the Canadian distributor for a biological company called BW Fusion, a pretty well-known American company. And we've been working with their lines for the last 4 seasons. Part of this presentation will be to share a little bit about what we've learned when working with these biological products in the hopes that we're going to be able to help you avoid some of the common pitfalls of a lot of products and companies out there. So you can use these products and get the most out of your soils and the products and your crop. The microbes that we specifically carry, there's several different lines, and they encompass residue degradation, manure management, and then what we'll talk about today is more that biofertility type. So why should you be interested if you're on this call in using biologicals? Well, we got myself very heavily involved and interested was to be more efficient with fertilizers and nutrients for the customers I work with. If you remember the data that Colin Elgie and Ben Rosser did with their Delta N project or their Zero N trials in the last few years, sometimes when adding 150 pounds of nitrogen at side dress time equaled 175 bushels of better corn yield compared to that Zero N strip. But sometimes in a lot of their work, 150 pounds of N only yielded maybe 10 bushels better than that Zero N strip. And why? Because the biology in the soil was able to supply the rest of that nitrogen to feed that crop and make the yield. It's estimated that if we apply a dollar of any particular nutrient, we only get a fraction of that dollar back in that season of application. So if we spend $1 on nitrogen and we expect to get 25 to 40 cents efficiency out of that application at maximum. Phosphorus is even less. When we spend a dollar, we may only get back 15 to 20 cents of that value out of the phosphorus. And there has to be a better way. So we'll discuss some ways we can accomplish that. It's important to understand the system, and this is simplified, but it's an important concept. When we look at the plant soil biological system, plants take up nutrients from the soil solution. We all know that. As those nutrient levels there get depleted, though, more is released from that loosely held or extractable portion of the soil. And when you get a soil test back from a lab, it's typically showing you that plant available nutrients, the combination of these two pools. But there's another pool in your soil, which is a much, much larger pool, and it's mostly unavailable to plants and tied up due to soil chemical reactions or soil properties. For examples, because our soils are highly calcareous, we have lots of calcium in the soils. When we add a nutrient like phosphorus out there, calcium will react with phosphorus, forms a precipitate called calcium phosphate, which is not plant available. Through our work with a company out of South Dakota called Next Level Labs, we've sent dozens of samples from Ontario down there to have that total pool analyzed. And what we've seen is we know in many soils there's thousands of pounds of phosphorus actually there, but tied up and not available, and tens of thousands of pounds of things like potassium, but also fixing clays and plant unavailable. It's that conversion between these pools is mostly microbial in nature, and having a balanced and well supplied microbial system means that this process between these pools works much better. Again, on the system, it's a give and take. There is a symbiotic relationship out there between the plant and the soil and the microbes. Plants feed the soil, and in turn, the soil feeds the plant. Plants will use up to 40% of their photosynthetic energy to produce exudates, which are just combinations of various carbons, sugars, carbohydrates, proteins, in an effort to attract microbes, which then will support their needs at that time. These microbes then feed on the exudates, colonizing that zone, provide nutrients for the plant for direct uptake, and in a lot of cases, those microbes can also provide enzymes, which can help solubilize and break down those unavailable nutrients, making them more plant available. And then the plant takes up the nutrients, and that cycle will continue. There are a lot of various microbes and companies positioning microbes in the Canadian market, as a lot of you could attest to. You can get these microbes which have any one of these various capabilities listed here as single species functions. You can get them as multiple teams or consortiums of microbes, which have multiple nutrient and plant benefit capabilities. And you can also get microbes which are either native or naturally found or genetically modified. An example of a product that we've worked with at CanGrow is called Renew. It's a consortium of naturally occurring microbes that has multiple nutrient, soil, and plant benefits. We utilize these products across multiple crops, and they can typically be applied in various ways, seed treatments, in furrow, or as a soil spray application. Next, I'll turn it over to John Van Dorp, who farms just outside of Woodstock, and he's used this product and other biologicals on his farm. And we're going to ask John to share out what he looks for in a biological and what his results and his observations on the farm have been.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Sean alluded to, I have been involved with his program for a couple of years now. I'm kind of like Norm, only I started a little bit earlier than him as far as how to improve the soil, its capability, its biology always interested me, and how to make the nutrients more available to the plant. As Sam alluded to earlier, I'm involved in the Source Water Protection Committee, which revolves around uh, helping keep the water healthy for human consumption. There are concerns about high nitrates in the water, and that's been one of the focuses that I've taken in the last decade or so, is how to establish a way for the plants to take up nutrients uh, from mostly the air and the bank of nutrients that's actually in the soil. My first experience was an Australian product that Ag Solutions brought in to fix nitrogen. We kind of had limited success, although we were in the early stages of understanding it. And as like most of the ones out there, you can replace about 25% of your nitrogen usage through this biological component. What interested me more about the renew aspect of it, that it has a few more goodies, you might say, in it that allow for the plant to uptake some of the stored or unavailable nutrients that I've been building up over the years with my manure applications. And the key there was to get mostly away from the use of bought or synthetic NPK fertilizers, and have the corn or beans. Those are the two crops I grow mostly. Take up the nutrients that are available. First year with the renew, we had a good response. I do try a lot of products over the years, and due to my soil having the great organic matter and lots of nutrients from the hog manure, most products didn't really get a response over the control. But the control this in 2024 got me a 4.1 bushel per acre increase, which was fair based on the low cost of the product per acre. I believe it's around $15 an acre in that area. Sean can verify that. What was really interesting in 2025, we were unfortunately in a zone where we really didn't get a lot of rain. I don't think August we got an inch of rain, and the check 197.5 bushel per acre was surprising compared to what I thought it could be. But the renew kind of reinforced my position on, helping the roots make the nutrients that are available in the soil more usable, or help the roots absorb with their fancy juices that they deliver to the root zone to convert the nutrients into usable form. And as a result, we did see a tremendous response, which I just gave me the confidence that I have already purchased next year's Renew for use. This is right in the area where I like to focus my research or experiences, you might say. Makes farming interesting when you're testing out new innovative strategies. As I said earlier, some products that look good maybe work well on other farms due to my extensive use of other products to enhance the biology in the soil. Just don't seem to give me the same results. But this Renew, it has something more in it that I think has a great potential on my farm. I think Sean uh, has the experience to and the information to see whether other farms have the capability of uh, going at or using this product to make that work for them. Other than that, I'm not as fancy as presenter as the other folks are, but it's just my basic approach to it. I enjoy the biology of the soil, and I find it much more interesting than the NPK that everybody else talks about. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And I'm going to make your day, John. It's actually between $8 and $13, depending on the rate range. So I just saved you a few bucks an acre right there.
I wasn't sure. That's I knew it was payback the first year, but and
Yeah.
then you did also say that over time, if I was good to my soil, that I could probably reduce the rate even more.
Yeah, that's right.
Time.
And so, why would you consider using biologicals in your farm? And here's some reasons that I've put up here. It's to make use of that tied up unavailable bank and to make sure that you're getting those nutrients that you've spent years and decades applying, but again, only a small percentage of that is available. In the case of John, I love John's story because he tried a starter for years and just could not see the payback. So here was a pretty inexpensive way for us to be able to still provide some value to that crop and also provide a good return. Uh, a lot of these microbes are not just about nutrients, although the nutrients are really important. They can also provide other stress factors, growth factors. There's some exclusionary principles. Maybe if you have the right biology there, it prevents some pathogens from actually infecting those roots and taking out some yield in that crop. It's important to know, though, besides the N fixers that are there that take the nitrogen out of the atmosphere and actually convert that into nitrogen for the plant, the microbes themselves really don't create fertility. You have to have that fertility in your soil. They just make that fertility more available to the crop. So the questions that we're trying to answer at CanGrow, we've got a few years under our belt, but we're still trying to dig in because every farm's different, every year's different. But how much can you reduce your commercial fertilizer, or do you reduce your commercial fertilizer? Some products out there recommend you keep the rates the same and hope that the biologicals add more yield. So that's definitely a question to ask any company that you're working with out there. Should I reduce? Can I reduce, or do I keep it the same? And then the other question that we've really focused on as a company, and we're understanding better and better, is what are you feeding your microbes? The Renew product that John used, it goes in furrow. So in a lot of cases, as a seed treatment or in furrow, it can feed on the exudates, on the carbons that are there. So that's the food source for it to colonize that rhizosphere, grow with the roots, and continue to feed as that plant is photosynthesizing and putting 30 to 40% of that energy back into the exudates. If you're applying more broader range products over the whole field, it's important to know a term called WEOC, and that's your water extractable organic carbon. That is the food source for a lot of biology in the system, and it's different than organic matter. It's somewhat correlated to organic matter, but not necessarily. Just because you have high organic matter, you might not have that real food source for the biology. So understanding that is pretty important. And we've to help answer a lot of these questions about food source and nutrient availability and supply and what will the biology do, we send quite a few samples, as I mentioned earlier, off to Next Level Labs in South Dakota. Traditional soil test labs, they do a tremendous job in providing the chemical and physical data for your soil. But if we're really trying to understand the biology, that nutrient release through the season for phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, micros, other nutrients, even if we have enough food or water extractable carbon to feed that system throughout the season, we found this lab can really help supply some of the metrics that we're looking for to help better understand that biological component, that third tier between the physical and chemical and biological system. Some other things, and this is more some of the learnings that we've had. There are many companies out there that can provide products that you'll be able to use through this program. It's important to remember that most the microbes are living organisms, and we really need to provide the best conditions for optimum growth. So some things to just consider here are don't let them freeze in a jug. If they freeze, the cells burst and the biology's dead. Doesn't do its job. Keep it out of direct sunlight. UV light kills, especially bacteria. You leave it out in the sun for a day, it heats up. That UV kills the biology's dead. Try to only mix what you can use that day and don't mix until the time of application. And that's just because some of your tank mix partners, and they're pretty flexible, a lot of these products. You can mix them with herbicides or other products out there, but it's important to mix them just before the time of application. Some other BMPs out there. As a living organism, check the expiry date. Make sure that the product is not expired. Um, some other key ones. I like the pH of the spray mixture. Make sure it's in at least a neutral range between 6 and 7.5. A lot of the microbes will survive there. Some of the consortiums might have microbes that do a little better at a pH of 6 or a pH of 7.5. So if you have some of those consortium mixes out there, you might have a broader range, but make sure you know what the pH of your situation is. If you are using town water or chlorinated water, make sure you let that water sit for at least 24 hours so it reduces the effect of that chlorine on reducing the biological content. One of my recommendations is to keep spray pressures below 60 psi. If we get too high of a psi, we might shear that biology. And then make sure you're following the labels as far as temperatures and applications and tillage. In some cases, tillage is not bad. It's not bad at all. But some cases you might want to wait. Our recommendation for some of our products is either apply it after you do any tillage or wait 7 days after application, and then you can do some tillage. And that's just in the essence to help that biology colonize, get into that crop and really do its job before we do any tillage that might lower its colonization populations. So with that, thank you, and please reach out if you have any questions at all via email, phone, or X. And more information on some of that Renew and other products can be found on our website there. And I just wanted to finish off with two important upcoming conferences. We have the OSCIA AGM and Deep Dive, which is around Residue Smart this year. And then there's a really innovative soil health conference going on at Chatham on February 12th. And it's put on by the local soil and conservation authorities. So please, if you're interested in soil health, this is a great conference for a low cost to be able to get out and see some very good speakers at. With that, thanks, John. Thanks for your help, John.
Thank you, Sean and John. That was very interesting, and I really liked the discussion about all those small things you do that might be sort of impacting the product. So before I dive into sort of the questions I have, but also that I've been fielding, I'm also going to invite Gord into the conversation. So we introduced Gord into today's sort of be on this panel around biological inoculants. So Gord serves on the OSCA board representing the Quinte region and is the chair of the research committee. He earned his Masters of Science from Guelph, specialising in biotechnology. He farms near Port Hope, where he lives with his wife and 2 kids. And he has some experience with biological inoculants, and really was just here sort of another story of another person using them and what he's experienced and maybe what hasn't worked or has worked on. So before we sort of kick off questions, Gord, do you want to introduce yourself a bit more, maybe what your farming system is like and what your experience has been with using biological inoculant products?
Sure, I can provide some of those things. And thanks for the introduction. And thanks very much to our panelists. I mean, it's very cool to hear about this whole thing. And I think biologicals, just as a whole sphere, is very interesting and exciting. And I have some things in my experience that maybe I got a little bit too excited and jumped in a little bit too deep. But I love the ideas that's already been talked about a little bit today in terms of, making the plant more, making its immune function better, making nutrients that are locked up more plant available or fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere. All these things they sound great, right? And as I said, it's easy to get excited about them. And I am guilty of being a little bit maybe too excited years back. And I set up this big trial, and I had this concoction of, there was microbes and biostimulants and furrow. I sourced some naked seed, and I had, replicated trials of corn seed, with less and less and less and less nitrogen. And I thought I was just going to have this great result, and I was going to share maybe put a paper together, and this everything would be great, right? But the system, at least in my field and in that season, basically crashed without very much of the usual fertilizers we would have put on. And I've sort of, stepped back since then in terms of not getting too crazy with the size of the trials for one thing, and how much we put into one trial. But it's sort of this time of year I look at results from trials that we have done over the years, and I try to figure out what went wrong. And my experience with biologicals, not to put a negative spin on it, but have been mostly either flat or in some cases even negative. There have been a few cases where we've seen something that looks really promising. So we say, okay, we're on to something. This product looks really good. And we try to repeat it on a larger scale trial in a different field, in a different growing season, of course, and it comes out flat, no response at all. So winter months, we're looking over our results and trying to figure out what's going on. And maybe some of the things are what Sean has already mentioned. Maybe we didn't handle the live product properly. Maybe we shared it in the sprayer. But I think overall we've since taken pretty good attention to those kinds of details, and I think we're doing an okay job from those perspectives. I mean, someone might get a result like that and conclude that the product's no good. But I prefer to think that these products are capable of doing what they're designed to do in the proper context. So my mind starts to go to, well, maybe I've introduced a live biological, for example, into an environment where it's not going to thrive. So maybe I've got a compacted layer, I don't have enough oxygen or water available to the microbes. And as Sean mentioned, maybe I don't have the right food sources. So there's these kinds of thought processes are going through our minds as we're trying to figure out what products are going to fit what we're trying to do. And and I think what we maybe failed to do so far in our situation is we maybe aren't really recognizing the what's actually limiting in our own fields. So maybe we're trying to get a product to do what is beyond what it's capable of doing or what it's designed to do. So, as I said, I don't mean to put anything negative on this sphere. I think it's very exciting and there's some really cool stuff, but I would recommend, if I was to talk to Gord 10 years ago, I would say, maybe spend some more time, not just rely on a few books, but, go to talk to someone like Sean, go to talk to a farmer like John, who has some experience in this and has had some successes, and then try to figure out what the context is in which they were able to achieve those successes. So, yeah, those are just a few initial thoughts of our experience. And we've tried quite a few different products in quite a few different contexts, but I think maybe we haven't been asking the right questions, and maybe our soils aren't ready for some of the things that we've tried to do. As John mentioned, he's got lots of fertility, he's got high organic matter. Um, Maybe those are the sources of some of his successes that we're not quite there yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really easy to like go to one of these sessions and only hear positive stories of it worked this. So I think having you an experience like maybe we haven't been successful this whole time, but we're still interested in learning why we're not successful. And I think part of this program with what we're doing is applying this funding to sort of get a variety of producers from all over Ontario so that then we can start to collect data to understand why is it seeming this product works here, this one doesn't work here. Why did it work one year and not the other? Why did it work in one field and not the other in the same farm? So having that multi-year trial with these large variety of farms is going to be really important for us to be able to start to help you guys collect that data and really answer these questions of what's the best way to do this.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's become really apparent that field trials at any scale is a lot of work, right? To do it
Yeah.
properly, you want replicated trials with randomized strips, et cetera, et cetera. You want your data, you want weigh wagon data. You need to do stats on it. All these kinds of things are, like I say, a lot of work and sometimes overwhelming to even try to get into it.
Yeah.
So the default often becomes, well, throw a jug in the last sprayer of the day and see if it does something in that back corner of the field. But I think we really have to support farmers in shouldering some of the risk, as you say, and helping them set up proper trials and collect the data and
Yeah.
consolidate those data so we can maybe figure out some of the context in which these things work. Be awesome.
Yeah, and it's really the goal of this whole thing is to be able to do that and achieve that. And so I guess my question, which goes to now all three of you, is if somebody came to you and Gord now, like came to you and was like, hey, I'm really interested in trying this product, what should I do to both prepare for the product? How do I choose the right one? How do I know when to apply? And also, how do I apply it? What would be your suggestions? What would be your comments to them?
So I think, and this is what I failed to do in the past, I think, is really sit down with yourself and your partners in your business and try to figure out if there really is a problem that you're trying to solve, and if it's specific enough that there's a product that fits that niche, right? And then if you think there is something, there's tons of information. There's no today in this day and age, there's no shortage of information, right? It's almost becomes the challenge to sift out what's real and what's not and what's really applicable to your situation. So pretty much the next step after that, and maybe it's concurrent with the step, is to call someone like Sean, right, and say, this is what we think is happening. Do you agree that this might be happening? How do we, what do we need to do? What do we need to test before we even start? What products are available and how would we use them, right? So it's something that I'm guilty of trying to do on my own, and I think that was a mistake.
Yeah.
And I'll just build on that for Gord that my experience has been that when you put a product on as a seed treatment or in furrow, you can expect that the exudates from that plant, as long as there's no stress through the season. As soon as a plant goes into stress, that exudation starts to get limited. So you might not see that carbon food source for them to continue to colonize and do their benefits. So, but typically we see more consistent responses with that on seed in furrow treatment versus a put into a sprayer and put down with herbicide. In that case, you're expecting that biology is going to colonize enough throughout the rows to provide that benefit for nitrogen, phosphorus, or whatever, and you're much more reliant on what we call that WEOC, that water extractable organic carbon, to fuel that system. And if you don't have enough of that WEOC, then you could see the population start to come up a bit, but then it runs out of food and it crashes, and you don't see the benefits that you're looking for. We've done a bunch of work also where, to Gord's point, in combination with starters or without starters, there's so many factors that you need to understand. What are you trying to accomplish, and what's your limiting factor, just as Gord specified.
I went down this road. I have a lab background, right? So I have this old microscope, and I was reading about how you can actually visualize and do counts of your microbes in your soil, and it was a bit of a crude enumeration of what was going on, but it was just as you described, Sean. I could see sometimes some changes in the populations, and then they would just kind of go "Meh," and crash right back to where they were before I even started, right? So maybe it's just as you described, we don't have the right enough of the right food sources for these things to flourish. Yeah, interesting.
If I may add, I think it's important that, like Norm has talked about, to help create the organic matter is to get proper residue management in place, and that was one of the keys that when I started was treating the residue with different products, and essentially we found that manure was one of the better liquid manure applications in the fall, and breaking the residue into fine particles was a quick and easy way to build up organic matter, which essentially is the storage units for all these nutrients in the soil, and that I would assume over time, and there's nothing better than corn residue, given that there's 10, 12 tons of residue left over after the growing season to get them worked into the soil. But that's just my 2 cents again.
Yeah, for sure. And one question that I see sort of come up here, maybe Sean, you might know, but if anyone, how well do biologicals establish in the soil, and maybe what factors in your soil might impact that establishment? And then also, is there ever a risk that they could be outcompeted by existing soil microbes? So essentially, you're adding this inoculant, but it doesn't really do anything because you already have a bunch of live microbes. Is that a risk that needs to be taken into account?
Yeah, absolutely. As a living organism, it's in a lot of cases it's temperature driven and it's moisture driven. So if you're planting the end of April and you're using a true biological and the soil's kind of cold and backward, you might not see the benefits early on. Where we like to use some of the biologicals is in combination with liquid starters or even dry starters, because a starter does its job for the first 30 days of that plant life cycle. The expectations are then after that 30 days, the biology, as it colonizes and starts growing with that rhizosphere, it's kicking in 30, 60, 90 days. So more of that later season fertility benefit and response. So that's one thing, temperature, planting conditions. And then from that, maybe not some. So if you're putting it in furrow as a seed treatment, we're trying to overcome some of that natural or maybe even pathogenic biology that might be out there in the soil, your rhizoctonias or fusariums, pythiums, etc. So if you can put it there right where that root's growing, you have a better chance to, and you're putting higher concentrations, you have a better chance to probably exclude those pathogens, outcompete those pathogens, and ultimately, depends on the company. Like the products that we have, they are all naturally occurring organisms that have just been put together and into a stable form that they can then benefit the soil. So it depends if it's genetically modified. There are companies out there with genetically modified products, and they're the long-term aspects. They're safe as well. They've been proven safe also.
That's good to know.
Case of the infro, would you provide some food source until the plant can provide it itself in those cases?
It depends on if we've got some of those soil samples to really show what is your WEOC in that soil and what's your ability of your soil to actually. In some cases, we might not even add microbes. If your soil sample comes back and it shows it's got a high respiration rate, and we can actually the lab will tell you how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potassium, even though potassium's not really biologically driven, there is still a component there, but it'll tell you for those nutrients how much to expect 1 month, 3 months, 4 months into the season from the biology. So it depends. There's a to throw these products on every acre. We're trying to take the approach to say where do you get the best response and the best benefit back on them. And in some of our trials, we've done some work with corn starters where we might not see any response when you put 5 gallons of a liquid starter with the biology. You might not see any response. And in other cases, with soybeans, for example, we're seeing 80% of the time, we're seeing a 3 to 3.5 bushel yield increase in some of those type of products. So every crop's a little different, and we kind of help work with customers out there and our distributors to better understand where to place the products.
That's cool.
Yeah. And the next question I see is it's for John, but also I guess Gord from your experiences. How how did you apply Renew or for Gord any biological inoculant to the crop and soil? How'd you do it?
Well, for myself, I replaced the NPK formula with simple water, 4 or 5 gallons per acre of water, and the 400 milligrams or whatever amount milliliters of product per acre. So we're talking not very many ounces of product per acre to right on the seed zone. I have 20-inch corn rows, so it tends to be a little lighter stream in the furrow because same with the corn, it's 6 inches apart in 30-inch rows, but it's 9 inches apart in 20-inch rows. So, but it's still placed in the root zone. What Sean has been saying, temperature is a key to activating microbes, and there was a lot of talk of lime green corn in the spring of 2025, but the soil in May just got cold and very, poor germination or time of germination was the issue. I've never had corn take longer than 5 days to get out of the ground when I plant the second week of May, and the past year took 15 days, so that is also a factor. But I think my corn didn't have that lime green color. It wasn't a perfect green, dark green, but it didn't suffer as much. But yeah, in furrow, to me, on the target zone, that's where the roots are developing, is my position.
Yeah, no, that's good. And then, so I guess my next question is, and Norm, if you have anything to input here as well, is we obviously, when we're trying out these new innovative practices, it's really important that we're also collecting like our soil data or our crop tissue data, our yields, to understand how these practices are changing those elements and comparing them to maybe other areas of your field where you're not applying that. So could you maybe each of you give a bit of an overview of sort of how you guys conduct on-farm trials or how you guys complete this data collection at each of your sites, and maybe a bit of what you wish you had done in the past or you would suggest that people do if they're just starting out with this type of thing?
Yeah, I can comment to that, Sam. So on our farm, anytime we're looking at trying a new product, we'll typically do 2 to 3 replications, and that involves, typically different rates as well as a check strip. And if you don't leave that check strip, then you really can't compare it to a standard practice. And then we'll typically test a product for 2 to 3 years on the farm. So that removes any skewing of data that might happen because of weather, because of different patterns or crops rotations in the field, etc. So in the case of biochar, where we're maybe only going to put 1 or 2 applications, we're essentially going to follow that data over a course of several years. So we'll apply 2 or 3 different rates plus a check strip, but we'll go back to those same areas and compare the yield that we collect from those areas over at least 2 or 3 years to have a true comparison.
Yeah. So I think that's that's sort of the optimal way to do it. And I think what's really important as part of the data collection element of this program is we would be setting up, and OSCAI staff would be helping participants to set up those trials and do a lot of that data collection with them at no additional cost. So it really follows that sort of ideal scenario you were talking about there. Does anyone else have any sort of suggestions?
Just one build on that. One of the things that we like to do is get out there at 30 to 45 days and dig up plants and roots and look at treated and untreated. Because in a lot of cases you might not see anything above the ground, but below the ground you might be seeing a lot of differences. And those things are hard to capture just with a yield trial, at the end of the year. So if you can get out and really dig some roots, you better understand the is this product working and what's it actually doing under the ground.
I think we need to pay a lot more attention to roots. John mentioned it too. That's obviously the mechanism by which we're accessing the nutrients, and there are some pretty cool technologies being developed and in situ radars and things like that. But just as you say, shovel in the truck and dig things up and see what's going on makes a big difference. What I found really helpful too is even the absence of a local weather station is to get internet-based weather from close stations close by. There's quite a network of them now, and as we know, every season is different. There's no such thing as a normal season, but I think in the one instance I was talking about, we had a couple of biological programs with wheat that looked super promising in the one year, and much less so. Like I said, basically zero response the following year. And we think that weather had a big part to do with that, right? The grain fill was so much shorter this past year than the year prior, and most of the response we saw was in kernel weight. So I think, weather played a big part in there, and it helps to explain what's perhaps going on. We never have all the answers, but it, it's one of those things. The sort of default question is the more data you can collect, the better. But there is a bit of a balance on how much you can handle. But some of the new tech is really helping with it. We're going to be working with some bigger operators in the area, and they've got some of the recording software in their machines. That it just makes things a little bit easier than it is versus spec center farms where there's literally clipboard with paper and wood wagons and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely. The weather is a big one I would add to that list.
Yeah, the weather also always seems to be a bit of a make or break or a variable factor that unfortunately we cannot control. but it impacts a lot. So yeah, that's where the multi-year sort of being able to do this for multiple years, collect that data and understand where that also impacts things. It's really important.
It's great to hear that there's going to be support. As I said earlier, I mean, it is a lot of work to do these trials properly.
Yeah.
Do we know what kind of form that support will take yet, or is that sort of to be determined as
Yeah.
things come in? Or
So that support will really look like myself, but also a team of sort of contracted service people from OSCAA spending a lot of our time over the spring to fall, really rotating between all the different sites that are part of this program and working with the farmers, setting up the trials. We'll be doing a lot of the data collection ourselves, so we'll be in charge of the soil sampling, sending that off for analysis and monitoring. And yeah, so a lot of it really is taking that work off the hands of the producer. Obviously, if a producer's really into it and wants to be involved, then we'll be figuring out, well, okay, how can we involve you, still get it done. But yeah, but this means that if somebody wants to be able to go out and soil sample and understand this, but just finds they don't have time, that's where we're like, we'll do it for you and we'll just amalgamate the results and be able to provide and then discuss those results with you and what do they mean.
awesome.
So yeah, it really comes on to the OSCAA staff, and we're not expecting at no cost to the producer as well. So it's really all included in this program.
That's great.
So one question, I think we're sort of nearing the end, but something I just wanted to touch on, and it came in, and it's just a way so that we can have just like, it's an open discussion to discuss all the possible risks associated, because we hear a lot, and myself especially, about biologicals. It's really easy to get down sort of a rabbit hole of negatives, and same with biochar. But I guess, what are the risks associated with each of sort of both biochar and biologicals? One comment here was with biochar, Norm, you discussed it, the risk that if you don't inoculate it properly, you might reduce your nutrient availability, or what's the risk of applying too much? And the same with biologicals. And then how can we ensure that people manage those risks appropriately? So like, how can I do this but not feel like I'm going too far or risk anything?
I can start, I guess. It's so really the risk is that it doesn't work and you don't see a return. That's the biggest risk from the aspect of putting it out there in the field on in corn or canola or cereals or any crop that needs nitrogen out there. The other risk is this is a big one. I always like to I said in those BMPs to make sure you only put in what you can plant or treat that day, and because these are living organisms. So if you fill up the planter and you get rained out, you go back to that field a week later, that biology's woken up and it's looking at that starter or even that water as a food source, and it's starting to multiply, colonize. So you could get bacterial sludge build up. You could have to go in and clean all your filters out. So that's a key watch out that I work with customers on, is to say, make sure that you're only using a lot of these biologicals for what you can treat that day. And at the end of the season, just flush the planter out. Make sure you don't leave it in there with your fertilizer at the end of the season. Otherwise, you'll come back the next year and you'll be giving me a call for sure. Not a happy call.
So further to that, I would say there's a big risk in making mistakes that have already been made by others. So there's really value in learning from people like Sean and John with those experiences they've had already, and just maybe it's a thing that's not on the label necessarily, but it's something that comes from experience and using a certain product. Um, Things like that. It's just you just kick yourself for doing it when someone already knew that you shouldn't have, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and similarly in the case of biochar, like there's no label and there's no prescription that comes with the product. It's literally that new. We really haven't tested it in temperate soils. We know anecdotally through research that it works well in sort of those sandier soils. At the end of the day, it's a pretty stable form of carbon, and we know our soils need additional carbon to sustain themselves. But the inherent characteristics of biochar is that it does absorb a lot. And so if you don't inoculate it or you don't treat it for a long enough period of time ahead of application, there is an inherent risk. I commented in the chat there that I wouldn't put, 5 tons of biochar down straight as a pure medium ahead of a 250 bushel corn crop, because the nitrogen that you then apply to feed that crop will ultimately be absorbed by the biochar and may not release in time for the crop's usage. So you do need to be careful. And in that case, maybe you want to spread out some of that application at lower rates over a longer period of time to allow that to mellow out. I know in our case, following a cereal crop ahead of a cover crop is going to be an ideal scenario because it will have a long period of time before the next cash crop is grown, and that'll also give it some more time to mellow out into the soil and allow the bacteria to sort of inhabitate the pores of the biochar once it's in the soil.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for all of that. I think it's really understanding that there is risk, but there's risk to anything that we do, and it's just increasing our information before we apply that. And a large part of this, I think, Gord, you mentioned like the thing that's going to go wrong is that it doesn't work. And part of that is then, well, there's a financial risk, and that's where this cost share element comes in, is our ability to help participants reduce that risk element. So we're reaching sort of the end. It's almost 4:30 and it's been a long day. So I'm just going to share sort of my screen again, just as we sort of come to the end. So here, I just want to really reiterate, there's been a few questions just around the program and what's included. We've linked the program website and the program guidelines in the chat function. But I'm just going to really recap here that what people will get by participating in this program is both financial support, but also data collection support for biochar and biological inoculants. So that financial support, it covers a maximum of 85% of approved project costs. So those eligible costs are sort of discussed further in the program guidelines, but it covers the cost of the product that you're using, the cost of shipping, the cost of handling. It also covers the costs of any sort of CCA services you might need to answer some of those questions about application rates. How do I do this? What's the best product for me? There is a maximum for the cost share. So if you're involved in other off-CAF projects and are not sure sort of what your funding is at, that's something that you can contact us about at OSCIA, and we'll be able to provide you a more clearer detail about what funding will be available under this program. In terms of the data collection element, I mentioned it before, our goal here is to really take that data collection sort of stress and risk off producers and really put it on ourselves here. So we'll be doing soil sampling, greenhouse gas monitoring, plant tissue analysis, all of that at each of the sites over the total course of the program. That information will then be provided to participants and we'll be able to discuss that. What does it mean for you? What does this mean for my next year? How should I maybe change things based on this result? And then to end things off, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who's joined us today. Hopefully you got a bit more information about the project, about biochar, about biological inoculants, and you're getting a bit excited about what you could maybe do on your fields. Thank you to John, Sean, Gord, and Norm for coming on today, sharing your experiences, sharing your expertise, and having this discussion. It's been really valuable. And this QR code here is to the website about this program. So if you give it a scan, you'll be able to go to that website, see our program guidelines, program intake date, which a reminder is next Monday, so the 26th. I've also included the off-CAF email. So if you have any questions that you want to email myself or anybody at OSCIA about the program, please feel free to send an email to that address. So yeah, thank you so much. It's Monday afternoon, so I'm sure everyone wants to log off and enjoy their evening. But yeah, if you have any questions, send us an email. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It's fun.
Bye.